Getting ready to go live. And welcome. It's a great honor. We have a wonderful guest, and what Trey doesn't know, before the conference, I met Trey at the Impact Conference put on by Pastor Henry Schaefer, Bonafide, Sister Schaefer, and many others. And I was sharing with Pastor Henry maybe a week before the conference that Pastor Henry, I'm not a type of guy who gravitates to meet certain people, but something about Trey Smith. I hope God somehow allows us to meet naturally without any force, without any trying to do it. And it happened. So let's welcome Trey Smith to tonight's broadcast on www.theonesourcenetwork.com. This will also be aired on 99.9 FM WUCC. And also, we're going to upload it to Scott and Amanda Cumby's channel. That's cumbies.com. Welcome, Trey.
Oh, it's an honor to meet you, Greg, and it was an honor to meet you very much too at that conference. And that was a deliverance conference, which is the first time that I've gone through a deliverance, but this is the first time I've ever been to a deliverance conference, and so that was an honor.
Hey, Trey, how did you meet Pastor Henry?
Okay, so that's a great question. So I used to do so actually at the time that I met him, I was kind of doing I was putting together what was I doing at the time I met him? So it was many years ago, and they would do these conferences in Branson, Missouri. And the conferences, so these would be conferences of Steve Quayle and Tom Horn and these guys. And these were largely about aliens and demons and all sorts of weird stuff. And I lived there in Branson at the time, and I would go to these things, and Henry was there at these things, and I just got to meeting him, and I I'll tell you the truth, Greg, that even in this past number of years, I've gone to all sorts of, largely I have not been a speaker at conferences that I've attended. For the past at least decade and a half, I would go to all sorts of conferences, even at times conferences that I disagreed with the people, just to hear what they were stating and to kind of get to know the different people, even if I disagreed with them. And a lot of conferences, a lot of things that I would learn the most from different people that I thought their ideas, were this or that. But anyhow, nevertheless, I got to meet Henry at one of these, and I quickly became a good friend of his. And one of the things that Henry told me, he said, these guys have got a lot of knowledge, some of them about, the weird kooky stuff and alien stuff and Nephilim stuff and all sorts of different ideas. And he said, but they don't know about deliverance. And he said, would you want to take some time later? And my wife and I would take some time. And would you want to go through through deliverance? And I told him, I said, well, sure, I guess I really didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I agreed to go do it with him. And I tell you the truth, Greg, that I honestly didn't know what I was getting myself into, which was better, because I probably actually would have ducked out of it, Greg, had I known how, and I'm very honest with you about this.
Yeah.
Because the deliverance is a very, it's a very personal thing. And you're going to go through some things that you don't really want to talk about or confront. It also takes, so I'm very thankful in retrospect, because somebody has to really actually care about you in some way to go through one of these, because this takes a number of hours to do. And also I believe there's a lot of people that do these deliverances that are just not like Henry or others. I think there's a lot of people, and this is just my opinion. I don't have any names to throw out there, but they're chasing some spooky stuff. And I even knew guys like this. I would get good clips from them of, here's an arm moving under the refrigerator or whatever, or a shadow running down the hallway that shouldn't be there. And so kind of the same thing you see on the, late night television shows where they're chasing ghosts and spooks. But Henry was not doing this. Henry was, and you could tell a difference because when he started in with it, he would call the things up. And the first time that I ever felt that, Greg, where something got called up and you could feel it come up and you could feel it go in and under the eyes. And he said, I can see it. And he said that I want you up inside the eyes. And and after that first one, it's like, imagine if you were swimming in a lake, okay, and the water's warm and all this, and you're swimming in there, and somebody's stating, come get out of the lake, and somebody starts pulling on you from under the water, and you're like, well, stop pulling at me or whatever. But then you come out of the water a little and you discover you got a leech on you and it's got these tentacles in there, and now you want them all off, right? So and this is kind of what I would like, you want them all off, not just a few of them off. And but the first one is the dramatic one. After that, you're just trying to get them out of there, right? And get the tentacles out. But you've now established that there really is a leech, and there's really something else there, and it's far different than making a video about it or talking about it, or, hey, here's what happened a long time ago. That there really is an entity that is inside of you that's pushing you for things. And now you're seeing this thing, or in my case, you're feeling it come out, and you can't unlive that. And and I was even talking to people about this a little earlier today, where, it's one thing to describe to people an event, or even like we're doing now, for me to describe to somebody that might listen to this show, you can hear it and believe it or not believe it, but there's nothing like going through it. You cannot undo going through it. And I'll tell you, one of the things that Henry told me is that so when, and I believe this, that when somebody is coming to go through the deliverance, because I've even told friends, I've got a friend of mine that I tried to talk into going through deliverance. And I even tried to offer him things to go do it, because I believe that a lot of things that are his troubles would disappear if he did this. But he will fight you tooth and nail, right? Even if you offer to give him a little money, you offer to, he's not going to anything but that, and you're kooky and you're crazy for suggesting it. And I, and you even tell the guy, you say, well, this would be a great time for you just to sit in a chair, get a little bit of free cash, buy you dinner afterwards, and you could, or not, you could just go home, and you could adequately say, well, you people are just kooky or crazy. No, I'm not going to see. That's the demon fighting. You see it?
Mind control, Trey? Could it be?
Yes. Well, it's the demon defending itself. It doesn't want to come out. Your friend, if you're telling your friend to, come go through the demon the demon that's been holding him down, it doesn't want to come out. They'll make the phones ring. Everybody will have a crisis. And then the moment you cancel going to the deliverance, the phones will stop ringing. These things are real, Greg. It's stunningly real. And, but if you've gone through that, it makes sense. You look around, you just simply can't unlive it. And that's how I met Henry. Was literally the first time I ever met the guy, I was spending hours with him and his wife in a hotel room, doing this. And I'm very thankful for that, because that's a lot of effort to do.
Yes.
And You can know something is real, but not really know it's real. If that makes sense.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, and I thank you so much for sharing. Pastor Henry and Sister Schaefer drove all the way to our home in Rhode Island to take us through deliverance. You
Really?
mentioned, you mentioned commitment and compassion. I think you have to have a great deal of compassion to do the work they're doing because, I mean, the hours that it takes sometimes, the energy, the spiritual energy that they pour out to help someone, the Holy Spirit in them, to help and assist a member of the body of Christ. It really is a dedication. But again, Jesus himself was driven by his compassion. So I thank you for sharing. But Trey, you're the first guest. And let me take a moment here so I can really gather my thoughts and allow the Holy Spirit to guide us. It must have been about 8 or 9 years ago when I came across your first video.
Oh, wow.
And for some reason, I was fascinated with your work. But really, what drew me in, I felt the anointing of God because there's a lot of people who are very intelligent and
Yeah.
they're so scientific. They study, they know how to put things together. But I never felt the anointing with them the same way I felt on you. And then recently I went back, I shared with Pastor Henry once again, I really would love to meet Trey. Not because of your knowledge, I felt you were a real person. You
Yeah.
had a real heart. That's more important to what someone does or what they have for me. But what was interesting a few weeks ago after the conference, I said, let me go to your channel again. And one of the first videos I witnessed had 10 million views. Now, could you explain the name of that video and how did you get started on this journey? How did God reveal himself to you?
Well, okay, so the evolution was a okay, so um I wanted to make something that fought against the theory of evolution was a big deal to me because when I was growing up, I remember going to so you really can't believe in both, Greg. I mean, as much as they say that you can, you really kind of have to pick one. And so and I would go to church, but then I remember started thinking to myself, this it's good for the emotion of it or whatever, but it can't really be real because over here the evolution, I mean, they really are telling you that you're stupid to believe in God. That's really the thrust of it, right? That is what they're telling you. And one day I came home from school and I told my dad this. I said, I said this evolution thing must be real. And on that occasion, and my dad didn't talk a lot growing up, honestly. He was really quiet. He did his work. I did, but on that occasion, he said, no, 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 no. That's just something that they say. He said they can't. You can't. He was a mathematician, and he said that doesn't work mathematically. So you can't. It just you can't. I mean, things just don't come to be on their own over time, and you can't get life out of rocks, and you can't. But to me, this was a big deal because um, that was someone that I trusted, my father. So had another Christian, or I watched some Christian. I might have thought what they said was nice, but it was somebody that I trusted stating no, that's wrong, and that really it broke a lot free in me. And from that time forward, I began kind of hunting out um, things, and I pretty quickly found that the theory of evolution and these things were ridiculous. And it was Greg, it was such a freeing feeling to me that I wanted to uh, put together something, and that was one of the first videos that I did, and it had awful audio. It had but it had a lot of heart in it. Actually, a lot of the videos weren't, I mean, from a video perspective, they were very poorly done, but they did have a lot of heart, and they had tons of misspellings. Oh my gosh, Greg, I've gone through. One time I had Israel misspelled real big on a graphic behind me, and I was like, oh my gosh. But I think that people, even atheists, first of all, I wasn't arrogant or mean to them about it, which was one of the things I saw with other people's videos. Sugar and spice, there's no, sugar and spice is, try to bring them to your side. But the videos had a lot of heart in them, and I believe that they were correct, Greg. And I thought I could kind of go through here, and I can give them, without telling somebody they're wrong. I can kind of go through and just, because nobody wants to hear that, not directly. You can kind of softly tell them that it just sort of looks like this, and it looks like this, and it looks like this, and let them sort of come to their own conclusion about it. And the answer that they're going to come to is it's like that. It's like that deliverance with Henry is far more profound than it not being there. The answer going what the science community is telling you, let's just say it was true, is really depressing. If what they were telling you is true, then all of this is meaningless. It's very depressing, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
If you go the other way with it, and God is real, then a whole new Pandora's box of things opens up.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment you begin to go that way, the evidence of it is just all over the place. And how are you going to get consciousness from a rock? How are you even controlling your physical body? And there's all the little tiny things that people just really aren't even thinking about. Very, very, very smart people. Greg, we really shouldn't. Without God, we shouldn't be here.
Mm.
um,
Trey, I'm fascinated about the way that God designed your ability to think outside of the norm. What's very interesting, I love being around people who can teach me something.
yeah.
Years back, and I remember having a conversation with this. I think I was at the university then, and I had this conversation with this very intelligent person who was well versed. I want to say he was a science major, but I'm not for sure. And he was explaining the theory of why evolution, the Big Bang theory, it was,
Hmm.
why the Big Bang theory was true. So when I was listening, I wasn't listening to correct him or to shame him or just to sort of be right.
Yeah.
It was something that came up in my spirit and it shocked him. I said, "Can I ask you a question about the Big Bang Theory?" He said, "Of course." I said, "Well, if the Big Bang Theory is true," and now this little boy in me came up. I
Yeah.
said, "Explain to me then, where does intelligence come from?" He couldn't
Yeah.
answer it because you can have all the energy contained in whatever, but it doesn't mean it has a intelligence. Now, could you explain it, or am I off, Trey?
No, that's a great question. What was his answer to that?
He couldn't go further because I wasn't there. I didn't have the information or the knowledge that he had. It just came up, and I think it stunned him. I think he didn't know how to respond to that. So maybe that seed alone was enough for that moment, Trey.
Well, it's because okay, so Greg, it's because there's not an answer for that, because actually the entire theory, if you think about it, is the same thing as the occult premises, because you're wanting order to come from chaos, and that
Hmm.
just doesn't happen. I mean, So everything that you see, and I mean, the car that you have outside, everything that you have sort of declines over time. And here you have this perfect human body, and you can't evolve it, because this would it has to be functional at the start. So you've I mean, in some way, maybe you could argue you could live without your arms or a couple of eyes, but you get down to core pieces, and these can't be off. It's one big system of things, and it has to be functional at the start. And if it's not, then it doesn't exist. And then that thing, whether it's you or whether it's a single celled thing, is dependent on all these other things that have to exist. And when you begin to look at it like that, there's just um, it, it, what they're looking for. What they're looking for, Greg, is a world without God, and the problem is, okay, it's all the reverse of reality. It's the most profound thing. I mean, where does a thought or an idea come from? There's no, and what do they weigh? So
Mm.
what is the real? I mean, so they would do all these experiments where they'll weigh a body when it's alive, and then they'll weigh it when it's dead, and they'll argue if it weighed any different, and some will say it weighed a little less, and others will say it weighed the same. Okay, so if you take a thumb drive, like let's say you take a 10 gigabyte thumb drive that you buy down at Best Buy, and
Hmm.
you go in and you fill it up with 10 gigabytes worth of data. Does it weigh more with the 10 gigabytes of data on there than it did without them?
No.
No, it weighs the same. And so I, Greg, I just believe the Lord. I believe there's just a plethora of reason to believe that the Lord is real, and that and that we really do step out of this place into, you know what this is, Greg? It's almost like a testing place
Hmm.
where we decide where we're going to go next. Um, and that may be an oversimplified way to view it, but it's the way that I viewed it. And that we're kind of picking where we want to go, and do we bite the hand that feeds us? And and it's really not that. And some people do. I mean, there's a lot of, and we're here to take as many people with us, and our friends and our family. And I also think there's going to be more people in heaven.
Mm.
Let me tell you this story. I, you know, so we all pray for people to. I think there's going to be more people. I think there's going to be a lot of people that make it that we thought would never make it. I really do, because I heard a story one time from, it was like an uncle or something, and my mother was telling me this, because a lot of times we'll pray for all these people, and we'll say, that person will just never make it, and they're too filthy, they're too covered in stuff, or they're not. And I had an uncle that was praying this, apparently, and he felt like the Lord had told him, said, there's going to be more people there than you think. And he had this little dog, and Greg, this is just a story that I heard, but it's always comforted me. But he had this little dog, and he loved the dog. Like my wife has got this cat that she loves, and people that love pets, they worry about it. And he felt like the Lord had told him on his spirit, and your little dog's going to be there too. And the Lord just strikes me as somebody that would do that for you. That you're going to get there, and even the little dog that you loved will be there. And um, Greg, I'm just I did not know that you had watched some of these videos early on, but that's what they were for.
Hmm.
I had no idea how they, that. So when I made those first couple of ones, I guess I thought about it differently than people do. People generally think, how am I going to make a profit from this or whatever? Um, I had most people at the time that I was doing like that theory of everything. I couldn't even afford coffee, Greg. Sometimes I would enjoy to go get coffee at this little shop, but I had to reduce down. I couldn't go like even at some points, even once a day, because it was too much for money for me to go get a coffee.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and people would tell me, you're foolish and you need to go get a job and you're wasting your time. And that's what I assumed I would do when I finished that video. And I thought people would laugh at me because it was a video. At that time, Greg, the atheists were a far bigger deal than they are now. So they would just mock at Christians, and so if you put up a Christian video supporting the Lord or supporting that God created the world, generally the atheists had the primary amounts of likes, and and you'd get very little, and you'd get laughed at, and that's what I was expecting to happen, and that did sort of happen. But I think the kind of trying to do sort of a humble approach and just sort of, I don't know. I was very sincere about it. And very often, I was at a place recently, Greg, where a man came up and he said, um, he said, I was an atheist for a lot of years. And he said, I watched one of those videos, and he said, and I knew that you were telling me the truth. And and even if I was off in a lot of spots, Greg, which I'm sure I was wrong in a lot of spots, a phrasing that I've fallen in love with is, if it's not right, it's probably close,
Hmm.
or at least in the right direction. And
Wow.
so, which is true, by the way.
Yes.
And yeah,
Something came up as you were speaking, and I want to put it this way. Oh, I got it. So I'm going back a bit once again, Trey, prior to the Impact Conference, and I was sharing with my wife and Pastor Henry how I'm just, I know it was God, because I'm the type of person, celebrity or whatever, I'm more about the person's heart.
yeah,
Well, to fast forward, all of a sudden, Pastor Henry called everyone up on stage who had a piece in the conference, and the
yes,
person that I was sitting next to was you. So
yeah,
all of a sudden, I'm listening to Pastor Henry, but I'm also listening to you. And here's what I heard most of the time, and I don't know if you knew I was listening. All you were doing, yes, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus.
oh
Yes,
wow.
yes. Is it true, Trey?
Maybe I didn't know I was doing that, but okay.
Yeah.
Um,
So that was an indicator to me, because
yeah,
Jesus knew that I wanted to meet you. But there's certain things I look for. And when
yeah,
you were praising him in silence,
yeah,
speaking softly his name, I said, Father, I thank you for allowing me to know who this man is, more than the information, more than the knowledge itself. I witnessed your heart, Trey. And I need to tell you, God gifted you in so many ways. And right now, people are dire. They're feeling hopeless. Look what's happening in Israel.
yeah,
But I believe right now, not only the information that you have, the knowledge that you can see things and break it down to a human element where people can get it, they understand it. It's your heart, it's the compassion that's elevating you. And when you mention and you say softly the name Jesus
yeah.
without no one witnessing it, or you didn't do it for anything but just to please him and honor him, I was able to hear it. And I said, that's the man that I always believed I felt. So I just want to share that. But for
That's
some
very kind.
reason,
That's very kind of you to say. I don't always feel that. Thank you very much. Um, 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 what do you think is coming, Greg? Does the Lord give you words
yes,
sometimes? Um,
When I was a little boy, and still to this day, I don't share this with many people. All my life, I would receive visions. But about 15 years ago or so, my mom came to me, and this, I'm glad you sort of brought this up, Trey, because I never really spoke about it. My wife knows, and a couple of people know. My mom said I was born with a veil over my face.
Yes.
And all my life, I was able to see things, but when I would share it with my parents, they said, "Oh, it's only your imagination," because they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't know. But only through the grace of God, yes, I do receive quite a bit of visions from God. And I'm very careful when I share certain visions because sometimes the mind itself, in my experience, Trey, there's a filtering that
Yeah.
I believe to really receive God's confirmation in his visions. There's a process that my mind has to go through to make sure that it's not my imagination, but it's God himself. So the older I get, I understand that there's a certain way that God works for me, that when I receive a vision from him, I experience this peace. And a lot of the times when I receive visions for the last, I would say, 8 or 9 months, there were visions that were very, very urgent to put out there.
Yeah.
And there are some changes. About 3 weeks, I received a vision. I was in prayer, and this man appeared, and
Hmm.
then I heard October. So I shared it on air. I shared it with my wife, and prior to the Israel attack, the week, several days before, I said things are getting ready to go dark in October. I don't know what it is, but I heard God clearly through the Holy Spirit give me certain dates.
Hmm.
And then to fast forward, Trey, several months ago, I was in prayer and I asked God, when is this all going to happen, Father? When is the shaking going to occur? And when I said the prayer immediately, I heard, no, I saw a tree. He showed me a vision of a beautiful tree with leaves on it. But
Hmm.
what was interesting, the leaves were falling off. So I knew in my spirit that vision meant that things would occur in the fall.
Yeah.
But the reason why I'm here tonight, I'm sensing it now, Trey. I also, a while back, I had a experience when I was transported, and I had to look in the Bible if it was a real thing that people or Christians were able to do to really serve God's purpose. Not,
You said this to me, didn't you?
yeah, but
And I'm sorry I didn't. Yeah. Yes. Continue.
yeah, and I ended up in Clement's house, and I saw him in his living room in his wife. But I remember saying something. But when I came back inside my body, I couldn't remember. But what was fascinating, to jump forward here again, I remember recently a video popped up with you and his daughter.
Yeah.
Well, why is the timing of you and his daughter and some of the things that you speak about, some of the prophecies that Kim Clements spoke into our existence? What, are you sort of, who was Kim Clements, and how did you get involved with meeting his daughter, and how did God align you with that purpose, Trey?
Well, okay. So, all right. So, where do I start with that one? Okay. So, okay. So many. Okay. So, um, my mother would go to a lot of praise and worship things. This is actually why the evolution thing bothered me, is because when I was growing up, my mother would go to a lot of churches that did praise and worship, and I would go with her. And so um, she also had a good sense for where the spirit of the Lord was in retrospect. So
Mm-hmm.
so Kim Clement is somebody that she would I can just, and she's still alive today. And um but so I went with her on a cruise one time. And this was a really big deal, um, to go and do that for us, at least. Um, and Kim would give words out. And so on one particular night, he gave out some words that were prophecies. He called several people up. And and he said some personal things, Greg, that I kind of but what he did tell me is, he said that and I was a really rebellious kid. So but I was the kind of kid that other people said he's never gonna go anywhere, particularly later in life. But I always kept that word from Kim, that one day you're gonna people are gonna really trust you, was sort of what he said. More than that, but I kept that in my spirit. And I hadn't thought about Kim Clement in many, many, many years. And I had largely done, Greg, these evolution videos, and videos kind of supportive of Noah's Ark, and very, and I enjoyed making those. They became really a lot of fun to make those videos. And some of them were very popular, and I just kind of got in a niche of making them. And I even got to make a little money making them, Greg. So I was pretty on top of myself.
So you could buy a coffee.
I could buy the coffee, and I even was able to buy a car. And back at that time, Greg, YouTube used to pay. They weren't doing um, they did the censorship, but they weren't censoring Noah's Ark and things like this. And so largely I was kind of left alone, and they were so then you were angling into this. Some of the conferences I was going to at that time, people were talking about prophecy stuff, and largely these prophecy conferences, Greg, they were just parroting what was on the news, which is fine. They were all very nice people. A lot of people are, they just kind of, this is, um, for whatever cause at that time. I believe it was the Lord, Greg. It wasn't something that I did, and it's not even something I do now, Greg. I don't, sometimes I ask the Lord for that. But the Lord doesn't very often, give me words or prophetic. I think when he does it more or less through maybe the video that's being made. What I do, Greg, is I ask the Lord, I say, Lord, will you just make sure that at least largely the thing I'm putting together is right. And but I was listening to all of these people stating, kind of, we're in the end times. This was everybody's prophecy. We're in the end times. Hillary Clinton's going to win. Everything's going to fall apart, and all of this. And a lot of these people had really compelled me, Greg, that we were in, more serious shape in the nation than a common person would think. Right? I was convinced of that there were deeper issues, with both the Republican and Democrat Party than anyone believed. I believe that, right? I started watching this grainy old Kim Clement tape, and I just watched it over and over and over again, and I felt like it was for that hour now. Now, Greg, I'm gonna share with you a few things on this radio show that have kind of been, because they're deeper things. If you go back and watch that original Trump prophecy video that I made, most of it in that video isn't even about Trump. Most of it in that video was about Islam and about Saudi Arabia and Iran and things that I think are happening right now.
Wow.
Yeah, let me tell you about that in just I was just so pleased with the Trump part of it, right?
Hmm.
Because there were a lot of people in the creation community and things like this that said, you've just done something really stupid. And when you start doing something political, even the people that should support you in that case, um, a lot of them didn't. Um, um, Now after Trump won, man, I had some pretty good fights, Greg, on that. Um, I'd like to fast forward, and I'm going to be careful how I couch a few things here, but I'm going to share some stuff with you here that has been pretty heavy stuff. That's a lot heavier than people in the creation community not wanting you to upload a tape, because those prophecies Kim was giving deal with nations. Several of those nations, some of the heavy things that Kim was talking about were Saudi Arabia. And I wasn't even paying attention to this, because he said that there would be four nations. He said that would be Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. That Russia was going to become like a mad dog set off his leash, and his bite would be hard, but his bite would not be against the United States. That he was going to, he said joy would come out of the Ukraine, but more than this, that he was going to go, that Putin was going to go into Europe. But before he could go into Israel, he'd be turned around and with a hook brought in his mouth. But in the midst of those time, he was stating that God, he said Arabia. He talked about Arabia and Mecca,
Hmm.
and he talked about how Kim said, I speak boldly but respectfully from this platform. And I'm going to be kind of careful how I phrase this, because we're in time. Kim was heavily talking about a new terror organization that was going to rise. So you have the Bin Laden thing, where you had this guy in a cave allegedly sending VHS tapes to CNN stating, I blew up your buildings, or I sent planes into your buildings. Then you fast forward and you had these ISIS guys. Now, these ISIS guys, if you remember, they were on the top of all the YouTube screens. Greg, if you or I went and threatened people and we're going to cut people's heads off, would they put us at the top of the YouTube screens? No, they wouldn't. So how did those ISIS guys get there? He said, but they'll be called another name, this ISIS thing. And he said, people will become very afraid. And he said, this will happen in the second presidency from now. Now, when he gave that presidency, it was a prophecy. It was during the time of Obama. So that second presidency from now is now, just like the Lord was giving you a thing saying during October. I think there are things coming that are real heavy. And Kim was praying against the blood of martyrs in the streets, particularly in New York. And
Mm.
and he said, but this would be Islamic, but it would be called another name. Now, I will tell you, Greg, that I did not know a lot. Of course, I know about Islam and these other things, but I know nothing really of Iran or Saudi Arabia. And I began getting a lot of messages following Trump going into office about Iran and about Saudi Arabia, and people inviting me to go to Saudi Arabia, which I will never go to Saudi Arabia. I don't. I have nothing against them. They're really nice people. I just don't trust it.
Hmm.
That's a country. The largest crimes you can commit, Greg, in that country are all things that insult Islam, and you can insult Islam without knowing you're insulting Islam, or criticize their government. And here was this tape by Kim Clement that is stating some pretty heavy things about what will come, because he was stating that that God was going to hold some of these countries accountable, and that their plan, that they had this plan amongst themselves against the United States, but that their plan was going to collapse in on itself. And the people that they had tried to make friends with, specifically, I think Putin,
Mm-hmm.
Um, they were going to watch things that they hoped and dreamed um, fall apart on them. I Here's where I'm going with that, Greg, is that um, I really pray a protection, but also a boldness, because I think a lot of these um, 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 I think we're in very dangerous times
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They said, the Lord will save us, but even if not, we're not going to bow.
Yes.
Um, but I had no idea at that time. Here's where I'm going, Greg. I was about to go visit a couple of the, one I wanted to go. Um, I probably will never visit an Islamic country again, and I've been foolish enough to do that once, but because of things that have been in videos, um, um, I'm really careful about that, because I did not know the depth of these people's anger, I guess. And see, they would be totally intolerant of a video like that Kim Clement one could get you beheaded there in their land.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm not sure why I said all of that, but um, one of the heaviest things that he was talking about in those prophecies um, um, were some things that seemed pretty dark, and they were terrorist things, and they were natural disaster things
Mm-hmm.
that were going to come to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And and after that, there would be a breaking, because he said you'll be humbled and yet some more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think we're on the edge of going through some things that probably won't scare you or I, Greg, or I hope not. I pray protection on our families, but I think are going to scare a lot of people a whole lot. Is
Yes.
I'm guessing.
You're
But
you're
go ahead.
no, I interrupted you. Go.
No, no, no. I'm done. That was my whole spiel on that.
Hey Trey, you just mentioned something concerning weather, and
Yeah.
about 2.5 years ago, I remember I I call it sleep vision. It was a it was I can't explain it with any uh any of our language. I'll put it that way. But all of a sudden, I was in a space where I could hear, in the spirit, and I heard an angel broadcast from heaven,
Hmm.
and the words I heard were pay, unprecedented weather.
Hmm.
I heard unprecedented weather. Then I heard pay attention to the lightning. I
Hmm.
don't know what that means yet. Then I heard after that, which I don't have any understanding. I heard right after that, we picked five.
We picked five.
That's exactly what I heard. I heard, and once again, the order was unprecedented weather. And this was broadcasted like through a loudspeaker.
Yeah.
Then I heard, pay attention to the lightning. Then, right after I heard, we picked five.
Mm.
I'm not clear yet on the what the lightning part means,
Yeah.
and I'm not clear. I have an idea about the five, but I want to make sure that I'm correct concerning what God wants me to put out there. But more importantly, when I heard this broadcast, all of a sudden, maybe a year after, the weather started getting really, really nasty.
Yeah.
The word that was very important for me to understand was the word unprecedented, unprecedented weather. So,
Right.
in your knowledge, given to you by the Holy Spirit, first and foremost, I think if you don't mind, could you share with the listeners your channel so they could educate themselves with your type of ministry, Trey?
Well, okay, so well, Greg, largely, okay, so let me be real clear about that, Greg, that I don't so I it's really rare that I think the Lord has actually given me so most of these things I'm describing to you here are things that I just have kind of pieced together. I believe that the Lord has gave this man Kim a lot of words for this time, and also other people, and I more or less um, 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 so now, and I can tell you that the things he was saying would agree with what you just said there. He talked. Okay, one of the things that he talked about a volcano, and he talked about whether things that were created, and so um, and I think largely that's what this is. Man, um Greg, I think we had some people that were going to just take us all for everything, and they're watching it fall apart. That's what I think.
Wow.
And I think that it's a different kind of warfare. So imagine you walked into an alley and some dudes grabbed your wallet, okay? And then you're like, "Give my wallet back." And they're like, "Dude, we didn't take your wallet. Quit talking conspiracy theories. Get back, man."
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, imagine if somebody took your wallet, because I hear this a lot from university people and all that. They say things like reasonable levels of corruption. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means. So if somebody stole half of your bank account, now in your mind, you're like, well, surely they wouldn't steal the other half, right? Well, of course they would. I mean, if they stole my car, surely they wouldn't steal my house. Well, of course they would. That's what they're coming for next. Um, I um uh yeah, they're I think all of these pay off. I think you have four nations that are rumbling around for blood: China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Russia. And so, in what Kim was stating is that they all kind of entered a pact with each other, but that Russia would be the wild card. He'd kind of screw their whole thing up.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other three had their eyes so focused on the United States, and it's not that Russia really likes the United States. It's just that he's going to use it as an opportunity to take their stuff,
Wow.
and um, and Putin's not a good guy either. I mean, there are a lot of Christians that Putin just today said that if the United States backs Israel, that he'll use nuclear weapons. But in those prophecies, Putin is not a um, um, we're coming up on some hard hours, Greg.
I'm
So
sensing, yeah. Hey, Trey, not to interrupt, but as you're speaking, the words in my spirit, I'm hearing a splitting apart. Is there any accuracy in that word, a splitting, especially here in the United States? States will be divided, land masses will be completely destroyed. Is that the heaviness that you're feeling, Trey?
I don't know, Greg. There could be quite a lot of death here. I hope so. So that whole tape, and I could okay. So um the I don't know, Greg. What does it take for people to wake up? So okay, so there are portions of the one tape where Kim was stating that people would be stricken for lack of fruit in the fields. that one compassionate woman would cook their own. I mean, some of it's pretty dark, Greg. And then he said, "But now my fury is ended." Um, Now, when that part comes to an end, he says, while these cats and dogs fight, and I think that's the Middle East, Russia, China, and all of them, well, these cats and dogs, that's who he's talking about, that America will begin to bloom. And, but you know what, Greg, let's couch this another way,
Please.
because here's where in our circles, Greg, meaning you and I circles of people, that all of these people that you and I know, all of these people in some way or another, and probably you yourself, have been preparing for all this for a long time. And probably many of the friends that you know, these people are not going to be shocked when these things go down. And you'll be in circles of friends where you're going to be, I promise you that you're going to be okay. And it'll still look scary, but it's not going to be for those other, it's not going to be like for those other people. I guess the answer to that, will there be a splitting in all these things? What does it take for many of these people to wake up and come back to the Lord?
Wow.
You know,
Thank you.
how much does it require? I mean, so that whatever the answer to that is what it's going to look like. And in some places more than other places, like for example, New York. I would not. All the bad whenever the terrorists, whenever people in foreign countries, they think about anything, they think first about New York.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever the dark stuff is they're going to do, I have a feeling that it will be the heaviest in New York and in the inner cities.
Mm-hmm.
And probably heavier in some than heavier in than others. So
You just,
um,
you, you just helped me as you're speaking. You just helped me remember. In a conversation, sometimes a person can be speaking, then all of a sudden a memory gets triggered, and
yeah,
all of a sudden you say, "Wow, this is in perfect order."
yeah,
Well, it just happened, and I asked Rebecca to help me sort of with this timeline. I want to say it was about 2 weeks ago, and I woke up and I shared it with my wife in this vision, not a dream. In this vision I had, I was with my daughter, and all of a sudden we was looking outside, and I'm trying to describe what I saw in the sky, Trey. It was all these different colors, shapes, but it looked like it was light.
yeah,
But it was all different types of diagrams, patterns. But what was happening, they were falling to earth. And I was sensing that people were so afraid because it felt like solid objects falling out of the skies. But for some reason, I knew this was just patterns, lights that were being projected into the sky, but they couldn't create any harm at all. So I shared with my daughter, don't be afraid. But as I was observing these objects that appeared to be falling from the sky, all of a
wow,
sudden they disappeared. So I don't know if there's going to be some type of light images that may cause fear in our world. And
yeah.
it, but this
You could
happened,
be right. Yeah,
yeah, this happened here in the United States. This was in the United States where I saw these patterns of light. But then recently, my wife and I was watching the news, and suddenly we were watching the bombings in Israel, and I looked up and I
mm,
said, "Rebecca, that's the patterns I saw in the dreams, in the dream vision I had." But what was interesting, those patterns were missiles.
yeah.
So because it had the same type of shape that I saw in the vision tray.
Mm. Good, Greg. People. Okay, so it's probably important to. Okay, so me and my wife and my family. Okay, so people that are Christians, you need you need some kind of a plan, and you need a way to because the um, worst case scenario, you don't use your plan, right? But the probability that you're coming up, and this is prophecy, no prophecy or anything, the probability you're coming up on time periods where there's going to be issues, and I speculate those issues um, probably are pretty dark, and they could include blackouts. They could, particularly if you're living in an inner city, you need enough gas that you can drive to the, because all of the gas stations are electric. So meaning that even if you had cash, they can't turn the pump on. So you need what a lot of people call a bug out bag, and that means enough food, so food that lasts a little bit, that you can get over to other family members or people or friends that are kind of like-minded, to be together. And so we and my family at this point, we kind of take that fairly seriously, because um um I think you are heading up on some hours where it's going to look fairly heavy, and I have no idea what that means or what that looks like. But it is very clear that, at least to me, that that there could come some days ahead where where people are just going to have to trust the Lord. But
Mm.
you're also going to have to get to somewhere which, if you're in an inner city, you dearly need to make sure that you've got gas and stuff that you can put in the car. And I would try to keep the car full of gas. And I don't mean to scare anybody. So the stuff you just saw happen in Israel, I think probably we're going to see it here.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so and the things that you saw with the riots and all of that back in 2020 or whatever year that was, that you're going to see that, and you're going to see it with Islam, and you're
Mm.
not going to be able to go out there and I mean, during the riots in 2020, me and my wife went through and we videotaped a bunch of that stuff, and most of it was college students and stuff. I think on this next time around, it's going to be Islam, and you're not going to be able to walk through there and negotiate with them.
Mm.
Um, so, um, but and if I'm wrong in all of that, then you've got some extra gas in your garage.
Yes.
And
Wow.
so, I mean, um, I mean, the inner cities is where that those things tend to hit.
Yeah.
And it also takes hard things for people to come back to the Lord. And um, I just feel, Greg, like that's what's coming, and that's probably what the Lord was showing you, and worse, because you've got, if you've got things in your vision that are coming from the sky, those are nations doing it. So now you've got
Mm.
a combination of both. You've got
Mm.
people on the ground causing you some terror, and then you've got other nations that, meanwhile, are trying to, imagine like tenderizing the meat with the guys down here, and over here they're trying to take you.
Yes. Wow. Hey, Trey, did Pastor Henry ever share with you what happened to him and I got to get this correct, in the year 2018?
Was this the vision of well, go ahead, tell me what it is.
Well, I'm sure maybe he has. It was about, he was sort of transported to the
Mhm.
year 2023, which is now.
Yes.
And what he witnessed, I don't know exactly the vision. And Rebecca, if you could help me, I think he was near some railroad tracks, and it was a completely abandoned. There were no one in the streets, and it looked like it was a very, 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 very dark time. But what was really important was it happened 2023.
Yes. Yeah, no, he okay, so Greg, he actually told me this vision at that time, and I tried to it's an example of a part I tried to I felt in my spirit like he was right, but I told him on the phone many times that maybe it was like a warning or something. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew, um, and then you get to today, and you can of course clearly see that, his vision of the dark tracks is, I think, what I had thought in my mind when I heard it. And um, the Greg, we're going there, but we're also going to come out the other side of it. I
That's right.
believe that.
That's
So,
right.
um, and I'm glad the Lord has given these things, because there's a lot of people out there that, even telling them this stuff, they think, see, Greg, they would call you crazy. They will call the Lord crazy. They'll even call, if you were to suggest, I mean, there are tons of people out there right now. If you tell them that evolution isn't true, including the people who run the world, you tell them evolution isn't true, you're a nut job. But they're fixing to be up close and personal with it. And the people they're going to run to, Greg, when it all goes down, are those crazy people like
Mhm.
you and I and Pastor Henry, and um, uh, that's what they're going to do. And yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Um, but I would really, I would really advise people not to wait even another day on putting together some kind of a plan with family members for if your phone doesn't work. So think about some of the basic stuff you do. So what do you do with you and your family members if you try to get on the phone? And I'm not stating this will happen, but it might. If you try to call your wife or whatever, now what do you do? Where do you meet at? Where do you go? If you can't call, what do you do? Where do you go to? And these are just real basic things, but I think they're things that um, people normally don't think about, and they should, particularly now in these years that we're at.
Mhm. Well, Trey, I mean, it just seems like you have so much information. I mean, I can't imagine with the knowledge and the intel and the things flowing through your mind, how do you put it in a specific order? I mean, it's amazing. But what I sense in my spirit now, Kim Clement's prophecy over you is correct. When I first met you, I felt, help him. You know, that's why I believe the media, WUCC, is in position so you can begin to speak. And no matter what happens, and I want to leave with this, and I believe this will give you even more hope.
Yeah.
About a year and a half ago, again, another vision, but I saw these, it was an object like it was like a cylinder.
Hmm.
That's the only way I could explain it. And what was coming out were these angels, but they came out in layers, just layers after layers after layers. But what was very interesting, the uniforms they had on, Trey, were incredible. I mean, just beyond sharp. But
Mm.
this was sort of the frightening part. When I saw their faces, they were so focused on their mission, their focus alone, their determination to get whatever God appointed them to do was so fierce that it was scary. That's how focused these angels are. And
Mm.
I know the angels I saw, they meant business. And I
Yeah.
believe in my heart now, Trey, they're either activated now or they're ready to do something. I don't know, but I believe this planet is surrounded with those military angels I saw.
Yeah. 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 Well, I believe you.
Hey,
But you know what? Even if we go, Greg, we're going to go right into heaven. And but Greg, I think we're going to be here to see a little bit on the other side of all this, because um, the um, The Lord's not done. So I personally do not believe we're at the end of all of it yet. I could be wrong.
Hmm.
Um, and by the way, the bad people are always there. They've done this a jillion times over. These are literally the same things that people are doing now, or the same things they did at the time of Nimrod. So, um, but you know what, Greg? We're just going to have a good time right through the middle of it.
I like that.
And even when they do their bad stuff, because it's the nice thing about them finally doing their bad stuff is that you're closer to the end of it. I don't think it's going to last very long. I don't.
Hmm.
And I don't. I believe, Greg, I believe you're right that there's military angels on this one. So in the Exodus, let me tell you this, in the Exodus thing,
Hmm.
a big part of the Exodus was for the Pharaoh to see. And it's also for the children of Israel to see, because you just told them, and gone in and fixed it for them, neither one would really believe. They had to go through the plagues, and they had to go through, because both sides needed to see that God was real. And something tells me in the end of this, it's going to look scary. But you know what? It's going to be good, man. It's going to be
I
good. And
believe.
it's an honor to know you, Greg. And I
Well,
would like to, and Greg, I'd like to do this more, because I'm so pleased with the Spirit of the Lord that's in you. And um, I'd like to do anything I can with you guys. So
that
I
would
thank
be
you
an
for
honor.
watching those old videos where the audio was too loud, and all of it.
I,
Um,
I remember sharing with my wife. I remember I would say, Rebecca, you have to hear this video about this guy. His name is Trey Smith. And what was exciting, maybe it was about a year and a half ago, Pastor Henry and I was having a conversation and your name came up. And I said, Pastor Henry, do you know him? He said, sure, I talk to him often. But it was the knowledge. Your
yeah.
information gave hope. So could you, does it feel comfortable for you to share your
Oh
YouTube
yeah.
channel?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yes, I would love to. Yes, I would love to do anything with you guys. I really and I mean that, and I'm very thankful for guys. I'm just a guy over here, and so we're
Yep.
so the this honestly, a lot of it has been a fight. So I'm very thankful for you being there, um, and I hope we can do some things that. Um, I'm hoping that there's favor for Christians on the other side of all this, because there's been I no, Greg, I just thank you very much.
I think, you know what, Trey, out of everything you know what I honor in you? It's your humility. That's what I respect about you. You happen to be filled with information and knowledge. But what I really enjoy about you, Trey, is your humility. That's what drew me in. So, and God can use a person like that, Trey. So I want to thank you for you being Trey. And I thank God for placing his words of knowledge inside your heart. That's what I want to say. So, do you have a couple of minutes? And again, can you share your YouTube channel, Trey?
Oh yes, so the YouTube, so it's just Trey Smith on YouTube, and and I'm trying my best not to be pulled there. So I generally make several different versions of things now. So on the Rumble. If you come over and subscribe to the Rumble, I've often been putting longer versions of things up there that would probably be pulled on YouTube, and that's true for the next few things. That um, Trey Smith on YouTube, and then over on Rumble, the same thing, Trey Smith or God in a Nutshell Project, and also godinanutshell.com. And So, and one of the ways to help us, if you like the videos, if you become a subscriber on there, it helps us. It's really what allows me to do them. So the stuff does look better now than it did in the past, but it's also well, I just want to thank you for watching the things that we have at all, and it's called God in a Nutshell, and sometimes occasionally we get things right, so I'm thankful for you.
I think you're hitting many home runs, and someone is saying hello to you there, Trey.
Oh, that's Tim.
So hello there, Bonafide, and thank you for the work that you're doing to help assist the kingdom of God. So once again, I thank God for your presence, Trey. And again, don't lose that humility because that's your gift for the world. So I want to say thank you, and I thank everyone in the chat tonight. My spirit was fed, Trey.
All right.
God
Well,
bless
God,
you. Could you
yeah.
stay on for a minute after Trey? Just for a moment after the
Oh,
broadcast?
yes. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And thank you, everyone. And God bless you.